Inside your spotlight this morning, we are focusing on childhood depression awareness. And to do that, I welcome psychologist Krista Ali. Good morning, Krista.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me.
Not a problem. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well, and you?
So far, so good. Tell me, what exactly is childhood depression and how is it different from just being sad or moody like most teenagers tend to go through at some point in time?
So when we're talking about childhood depression, it actually doesn't look that different from adult depression. When we diagnose depression, we use almost the same category. And this is what people need to understand as well. Depression, we use it as one word, but it's really a combination of symptoms that leads to our diagnosis.
Okay.
So being sad is really just one part of it. Because, normally we say depressed when we're just feeling sad.
Right.
And that is really the difference, that depression as a mental health diagnosis is really a combination of symptoms that includes sadness, but also involves being very, very irritable. And this is one of the major things that we see in children who are clinically depressed. They are very withdrawn. There is so much changes that affects every aspect of their functioning. And this is how we categorize just moodiness or sadness or everyday emotions from a clinical diagnosis of depression. So it really affects their functioning in all spheres of their life. And this is what we have to look out for. And this is essentially the difference between just what we generally see in children as they go through their regular development in terms of dealing with emotions, learning how to regulate in the world, learning how to deal with issues in the world.
You mentioned sadness and irritability as two of the things that of the factors that lead to the diagnosis of depression. What are some of the other factors that we look for?
So those I mentioned are symptoms.
Symptoms, okay.
Symptoms of depression. So those would include irritability, sadness, crying a lot, which we call crying spells, being withdrawn, not enjoying things that you would have enjoyed before, but also, and this is something that we really need to bring into the discussion, because a symptom of depression is actually hopelessness, and that level of hopelessness often leads to suicidal ideation, thinking about death. And, this is what I want people to understand as well, because so often we're talking about, very often in our conversations today, we're talking about suicide. We're talking about the number of children who are attempting suicide, who are committing and completing suicide. What we need to understand is that it's severely linked to depression. It's linked to childhood depression. So I think what you were referring to is, how does this come about?
Well, I wanted to ask if it happens, if it is something that happens suddenly, like we see sudden changes, or is it small changes over time that we can mark?
So quite often it's small changes that happens over time, because in the same way that the issues that we're dealing with, it deepens over time. So it might start off with your child feeling just generally sad a little bit because they're dealing with something stressful. But where the issue comes in and the actual depression comes in is when it's persistent. And that's basically what we're talking about with a diagnosis of depression, is the persistency of it as well as the intensity. So every child is going to go through periods, just like us. You're going to go through periods where you're a bit low. You're dealing with something stressful. You don't know how to navigate it, and it leads to you feeling a bit depressed, feeling low. But what we're talking about here is something that is persistent over time, and it increasingly gets worse.
How much time are we talking?
So for our diagnosis, we're looking at a period of about 2 weeks of very persistent sadness, as well as other symptoms, because we can't take it, it's a context.
Right.
It's a context. So a period of 2 weeks that could extend to years, because we have children who they're mildly depressed, because of course it's on a continuum as well, and they can be like that for years, and sometimes we don't know because they're so high functioning as well.
Yeah. So how do we even begin to help those who are high functioning but mildly depressed?
So it's a matter of us learning how to pinpoint what it is we're looking at.
Right.
And I always say, every time I'm on every platform, you are the experts on your child. So you're going to notice very small changes. What I will say, though, is that quite often children who are depressed, just like adults, they're able to hide it and mask it. So it's not about how they're interacting in a big space when we, doing fun family things. It's about the quiet moments. And this is why we say having a conversation and leaving room for conversations and open discussion with your child is so important, because it's really in the quiet moments, the things that they say or the things that we see is going to be those big indicators or those red flags that something deep or serious is happening with our children. So one thing I have noticed is that they tend to have a very negative outlook on life. Yes, and they also say very negative things about themselves. So it's the self-criticizing, it's the talking about how things seem quite hopeless and nothing good is going to happen to them. They can't do anything good. These are major red flags that we need to look out for.
How often is that also a reflection of the conversations that the adults have around them or
Quite
to
often.
them?
Quite often. So, I mean, that is a type of abuse, right? When we're persistently putting our children down, verbal abuse is a very real thing. And, you know, what I wanted to bring into the conversation now is exactly how these things lead to childhood depression, because it doesn't have to always be something very dramatic. I'm a child protection social psychologist. So it's like, we think in the grand scheme of things, the things that children are exposed to, the trauma, the violence, the domestic abuse, the abusive situations that they encounter, yes, those things lead to a higher level, or you know, in that population, we do see higher levels of childhood depression. But it's also the very simple things as well. The children who come from very unstable families, where, you know, everything looks okay on the outside, but inside or within the closed doors of that family, it's loveless. There's no emotions. There's no physical contact. There's no, you know, uplifting words. There's no support. These children as well are at high risk of developing childhood depression as well.
So it's not just the big ticket ones.
No.
It's sometimes the little ones that we can't see as well.
It's the under the radar ones, and those are the ones we need to look out for.
So how do we begin to support those children? Should the teachers be looking out for that? Who should be looking out for that, if that's the case? Because if everything looks normal on the outside, and we're saying, all right, so the parents are not the one to look out for it because they're the ones that might be causing the harm without even realizing it in some cases. Who is to look out for these children?
So you said something really important there. And, you know, and it's not a matter of pinpointing blame on anyone, but it's a matter of just being responsible and understanding all the contributing factors, and that sometimes the adults in the lives of these children might be contributing to it. What they can look out for is, again, just these little changes, leaving room for open conversation, because oftentimes when we have children who are attempting suicide or reaching that level, it's because they don't know who to reach out to. So often reminding children that I am a safe and trusted space, I'm a safe and trusted adult in your life, can help to bridge that gap where they have some sort of outlet, or they know that they have somebody that they can talk to. And of course, we as the adults, every adult around a child who's involved in that child's upbringing in some way, we have a duty and a responsibility to listen to the child whenever they might be, you know, ready to speak about something like that.
It's sometimes, you know, the adults in the situation, like you mentioned, they need to be a little bit more aware of everything going on around them, and including how they relate to the children, how they talk to and about the children. However, I know that as an adult, you have all the stress of, let's say, the bills, of job, of this, of that, of the other, and you may not, a lot of people may not even be dealing with their own traumas, far less for being able to deal with whatever may be presented in children. Is depression something that could be hereditary, or it can?
So there's a high link between a family history of depression and then also our children developing depression. And that is, of course, because of what we are seeing, what we're being exposed to, what's going on in the family as a whole. So that's definitely one of the risk factors that we look at with childhood depression.
Okay, so in that light, do we just now have to deal with it if you realize that I do suffer from depression as an adult? And I figured out how to cope with it. I figured out, all right, I'm trying the best for my child. However, they still end up showing signs of depression, right? Is depression something that can be healed, or is it something that you just have to live with and deal with and manage for the rest of your life?
So both. Definitely, if we heal the underlying trauma or the situation that's leading to the depression, we can see healing from it and a total 360 turnaround. Also because sometimes depression is environmental, right? So the situation that the child might be experiencing in one particular space or at one particular time, that might be leading to it. And then when they remove from that situation, we do see an alleviation in symptoms. Sometimes, so it's something that is recurrent. Just like with adults, we know that, you know, it's something that we deal with quite often, and it's about learning the different coping skills and the techniques that we need to learn to help deal with it and treat with it when the symptoms do come up.
What are some of those coping techniques?
Various things. So when we're looking at our children, right, we need to help them to build resiliency, and one of that is navigating the very difficult challenges of life. Yeah, just understanding that we can't do things on our own, because for some reason our kids always feel like they know best. Being a teenager these days, you have so much stuff that you're learning and you're inputting, but they think that they can handle things on their own. And I think one of the biggest things is helping them to understand that help is not a negative thing. Letting people know when you're not dealing well with something, or you're dealing with something very stressful, that's not a negative thing. But it's really about the environment that we create for our children, where, sometimes they feel so isolated that they don't think that they're going to receive the assistance that they need, or more than likely that they're going to get into trouble. Or, like you were mentioning earlier, parents are dealing with so much stressful things already. They don't want to add another stressful thing to their parents. We need to help our children to understand that, they are important as well, right? So in the same way that we're looking at job, social life, all these type of things, children need to be our priority as well. Because being a parent, it doesn't turn off, it doesn't end. It needs to be a job as well. An ongoing 24/7
18-year job. And probably even
and
longer
beyond.
than that. Is there support available for children who are depressed?
Yes, there's a lot of support, but what I wanted to actually mention today is a new website that was recently launched by the Ministry of Health called Teen Care. And on that, there's so many resources for our children to look at in terms of, I'm talking about coping. They have a lot of videos on coping skills, not just for depression, but all sorts of things that affect our kids today. Anxiety, bullying, all these type of things that all contribute to childhood depression. And I know that we're talking about teenagers a lot, but I just wanted to also mention that, we often do see symptoms of depression in much younger children. And it really just speaks to the type of trauma and the type of adverse childhood experiences that our kids are experiencing today.
Before we go to the next question, just repeat the website for me.
Teen Care.
It's teencare.com or .gov.tt?
Yeah.
Teencare.gov.tt is the website.
But if you just Google Teen Care TT, it will come up. But I just wanted to also mention that for parents as well, there's support as well. Because we do have a lot of clinics, including the Child Guidance Clinic, the Stress Relief Center, all of these places as well, that helps with this. It helps with diagnosis of depression, whatever medications that might be necessary, because that also is necessary at some point in time. Counseling, things like that's also available.
Now, one of the things that always baffles me is trying to find that difference between what we would call the growing pains of being a teenager, right? So you go through periods where you might be the coolest person in school, or you might get rejected from somebody you're attracted to, as the case may be. You might be invited to the line that you think you should have been invited to, you want to go. And these things have an effect on you, right? But they also tend to build character, as you say, and you get to learn how to navigate the adult world, right? The things that come with the adult world. How do we find that difference between, all right, this is a feeling of rejection versus a feeling of depression?
Right. So what you're mentioning about building character is actually building resiliency.
Right.
Yeah, and that is something that we develop over time as we encounter different situations. Now, what I have to mention is that there's so many different things that can affect the personality development of a child, including all of the experiences and including looking at the way that the adults around us deal with situations. So what we need to do is remember that parenting starts from a young age, where we have to teach our children that a misstep is not failure. So being rejected by somebody, yes, you feel that sense of rejection, but it doesn't identify or it's not who you are at the core. It's just a situation that you dealt with one person, but in the broad view of things, this is not who I am. And it's really the parents' responsibility, or the guardians, or everybody who's around our children, to teach them that and to not only teach them but to show them that. So that's one way that we can start.
Yeah. Well, Crystal, let me thank you very much for joining us yet again and chatting about childhood depression awareness and making sure that we all have a little bit more information that we can hopefully do a little better with as adults. So thank you very much for your time this morning.
You're welcome.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, head across to teencare.gov.tt. Check it out. You could also check out ttchildren.org and get all the information that you need to be able to be a better parent, be a better adult, and just care a little bit more. We take a quick break and we come back with more in our morning show. Stay tuned.
Not later, right now.